The first thing William noticed was the smell. Pine resin, cold water somewhere nearby, and earth that had never once been paved. He filled his lungs with it, and for the first time in months, felt his shoulders drop below his ears. He had always been like this about the wilderness. As a boy growing up in Big Spring, Texas, a town whose primary virtues were flatness and a certain honorable lack of pretension, he had dragged his parents on every hiking trail within a 3-hour radius. His legs found it soothing. His mind found it necessary. When he moved north for university, to Washington State, with its dark cathedral forests and lakes so cold they made his teeth ache, he had felt, privately, that he had arrived somewhere closer to home than home had ever been.
He was an electronic engineer now. Freshly certified, freshly employed, and freshly bored of both. The job was fine. Fine in the way that fluorescent lighting is fine. Perfectly adequate, faintly dispiriting. It was his cousin Jim who had planted the seed. At the family Christmas gathering, Jim, a large, enthusiastic man with the energy of a golden retriever and the focus of one, had stood up after dinner and described in glorious, rambling detail a trip he'd taken to British Columbia. A valley, he said, lakes like blue glass, mountains that made you feel appropriately small. He'd shown photographs on his phone, passing it around the table. William had stared at one image for a long time.
The lake in the photo was the color of a clear sky turned on its side, ringed by mountains that looked almost too dramatic to be real. The sort of scenery that made you feel nature had been showing off. Jim mentioned they had camped 4 nights, said it was mostly beautiful, mostly uneventful, said mostly twice. William filed that away and forgot it. 2 months into the new job, once the work had settled into something he could manage without using his whole brain, he made phone calls, texts, carefully worded invitations. One by one, his friends declined. Previous commitments, other trips, the general administrative chaos of adult life. The last refusal arrived on a Thursday afternoon. He stared at his phone. Then he booked the permits anyway. William crossed into British Columbia on a Friday morning, parked his car at the trailhead outside a small town called Clearwater, and shouldered his pack. He had planned for 5 days. He had packed accordingly. Good freeze-dried meals, bear canister, rain gear, a camera he was privately quite proud of. He had also packed a small, heavy canister of bear spray because he was sensible, and not, he told himself firmly, because Jim had said mostly. The trail began easily enough. It was early spring, and the forest was waking up in that slightly chaotic way forests have. Birds testing their voices, water moving under ice, new growth pushing through the mulch of last year's dead things. William photographed a red-shouldered hawk sitting in a pine like a small, imperious lord. He photographed the way light broke across a moving stream. He photographed a tree that looked, with a bit of imagination, like it was startled. He set up camp in a clearing as the afternoon light went amber. Everything around him was alive and loud and rustling. And then, as the sun dropped behind the tree line, it wasn't. The birds stopped. Not gradually, the way birds stop at dusk. All at once. William looked up from his camp stove. The forest around him was perfectly, completely still. He told himself this was normal. It wasn't, quite, but he told himself it was, which is a thing people do when they are alone in the woods, and the birds have all gone quiet at the same moment. He ate. He lit a small fire controlled and sensible. He scrolled through his photos. The red hawk looked magnificent. The startled tree was, in retrospect, just a tree. He swiped past the stream, past the light through the pines, and stopped in the background of one photo, far behind the tree line. Something was standing. He zoomed in. The camera hadn't caught it clearly. It was too far, the light already dimming. But it was tall, very tall, dark, covered, it seemed, in something that might have been fur, or might have been shadow, or might have been the particular cruelty of pixelation and maximum zoom. It looked like a tree. He told himself it was a tree. He went to bed.
He was asleep when the sound started. It pulled him up out of unconsciousness like a fishhook, slow at first, then suddenly urgent. He lay in his sleeping bag with his eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling of the tent. The sound was unlike anything he could name. Not an animal call, not rustling. It was a long, low dragging, like something heavy being pulled across dry leaves in a slow, patient arc. It moved in a crescent around the tent. 15 meters out, perhaps. Maybe less. William didn't move. He lay completely still. It wasn't a bear. He knew bears. He'd encountered bears on 6 separate trails and understood their rhythms. This was different. This was slow, deliberate, a sound that suggested patience in a way that animals, real animals, normal animals, generally don't bother with. He waited, and waited, and waited. The sound continued for 2 hours. Then it faded, an hour before dawn, retreating into the forest so gradually he couldn't pinpoint the moment it stopped. When the sun finally rose, William unzipped the tent and stood in the cool morning air, looking at the ground. There were holes, deep ones, roughly 3 inches, punched into the earth in a semicircle around his camp. And between them, prints. Long, strange prints that were wrong in the way a word is wrong when you spell it out and realize none of the letters are right. Not a bear, not a wolf. Something like a dog print, but stretched, as though whatever had made it was built to different proportions. William packed his tent in 11 minutes. He counted. The second day was beautiful. He was annoyed that it was beautiful, because he would have preferred to dismiss the whole valley as unpleasant and leave. But the hills climbed into pale sky, and he found smooth stones polished by old rivers, and the forest opened occasionally into long views that made him feel the specific, wordless gratitude that landscapes sometimes demand. He checked behind him every 20 minutes or so, just to be sensible. He almost reached the lake. He could feel it the way you sometimes feel a word on the tip of your tongue. Close, just out of sight, behind one more ridge. He made camp before he reached it. He was exhausted from the previous night, and the light was failing. And he was, if he was honest, not entirely sure he wanted to be by an open lake after dark. He was asleep when his body woke him before his mind had decided to. The smell arrived first. It was the worst thing about it. Rotten eggs and standing water, and something else underneath, something animal and old and deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then the sounds registered.
The dragging was back, but closer this time, much closer. 6 feet away. 6 feet. There was digging, low shuffling, a wet, guttural sound, not quite a growl, not quite breathing, that moved slowly around the tent wall. William found his bear spray in the dark without looking, by feel alone. His hands did not shake, which he appreciated. He checked his watch. 3 hours to sunrise.
He lay still and ran through contingencies the way an engineer would, calmly, methodically, in order of probability. Bear, cougar, wolverine, unusual bear. He dismissed each in turn. None of them moved like this, in this circling, measured way that implied not hunger, but interest. The tent wall was very thin. He waited. An hour. 2. He waited. Just before dawn, the sounds faded again. The same slow retreat into the trees, the same impossible patience. When the first gray light came through the tent fabric, William opened the zip very carefully and looked out. The holes were back, deeper this time. The prints circled the tent in an unbroken ring, inches from the fabric, as though whatever had made them had measured the distance carefully and decided to stay just outside it. He moved fast, not panicking. He was quite specific with himself about this, but with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided that a particular situation no longer requires further investigation. He had done his research before the trip. He knew the valley's geography by heart. Mountains on all sides. 3 passages in and out. 2 on the eastern edge, side by side. 1 on the western side, which is where he had entered. If something had been following him since day 1, it knew where he had come from. He would go west, cross into the valley, reach the lake. The lake was the whole point. He was not going home without seeing the lake. Footsteps quickening, then slowing in awe. He came through the western passage and stopped. The lake was extraordinary. Blue in a way that seemed slightly implausible, as though the color had been turned up by someone who didn't know when to stop. The mountains behind it were their own weather system, dark green and gray and snow-capped, reflected so precisely in the water that the line between mountain and mirror was genuinely unclear. A heron stood at the shore, like a visitor who had arrived very early and decided to wait. William reached for his camera. It wasn't there. He searched his bag twice, then a third time. The camera, the one he was privately quite proud of, was gone. It had been there the night before. He was certain of it. He stood at the edge of perhaps the most beautiful place he had ever seen and photographed it on his phone, which was fine, which was absolutely fine. He found a raised outcrop on the valley wall with a clear view of the western passage and sat there with his phone and his bear spray and watched the lake turn colors as the afternoon went on. The passage stayed empty. The light on the water turned gold, then amber, then the particular bruised purple of high-altitude dusk. He tried to be rational about it. He had been tired. The sounds could have been anything. The prints were strange, but not impossible. He had probably set his camera down and forgotten where. He watched the passage. Nothing came through. He slept, eventually, to the sound of water moving somewhere below him. He was awake 10 minutes before his alarm. Outside, the lake was catching the very first light The kind that turns everything briefly, unreasonably beautiful. Mist across the water. The heron was back, or possibly had never left. William lay looking at it through the tent mesh and felt, for one quiet moment, entirely at peace. Then he heard it. The dragging from the lakeshore. He was out of his sleeping bag before he decided to, crouched at the mesh, looking. It was standing at the edge of the lake. 9 feet tall, perhaps, brownish black, with patches of fur that sat on it wrongly, too sparse in some places, too thick in others, as though it had been assembled from several different somethings. It stood on its hind legs with a posture that was almost casual, almost familiar, which was somehow worse than if it had been crouched and feral. Almost no head. That was the detail his brain kept returning to, the detail that refused to settle into anything sensible. A vast, sloping body, and then, where a head should have been, barely enough, just enough. Eyes somewhere in there that I couldn't quite place. It was drinking from the lake. Not lapping, not the way a bear drinks, muzzle submerged, efficient and animal. It was scooping water with its hand. Its hand. Long fingers, wrong proportions, doing something unmistakably deliberate.
William did not move. He did not breathe. Or, if he did, he was not aware of it. The creature finished drinking. It lowered its hand. It turned its almost head slightly. Not towards him, not quite, but in a way that suggested it was aware of the general direction of things. And then it began to walk east, along the shore, unhurried. It moved on its hind legs with a lopsided, tilting gait that was wrong in a way he couldn't articulate, like watching a word you know well suddenly look unfamiliar on a page. Fast for its size. Within 3 minutes, it had crossed into the tree line and disappeared. William sat for another 5 minutes without moving. Then he began to plan. 2 eastern passages, and the creature had gone east. 1 southern passage that his maps showed as possible. Not a trail exactly, but traversable. From there, straight south through uncharted forest to a small town he'd identified during his research. He calculated the angle on his compass, cross-referenced with 3 mountain peaks visible from his position, estimated the distance. 9 hours, perhaps. 10 if the terrain was bad. He left his camp stove, left the tripod that was useless without the camera, left most of the remaining food because he could move faster without weight, and he needed to move faster without weight. And he had been telling himself for the past 12 hours that he was not afraid. But he was, rather badly, afraid. He took the compass, the map, the bear spray, his phone with 43% battery.
He moved south through forest that had no trail and didn't apologize for it. Branches, slope, the specific misery of wet boots. He checked behind him constantly now, without embarrassment, and found nothing. No prints, no dragging sound, no tall, dark shape at the edge of his vision. By mid-afternoon,
He had covered 11 miles. He was tired in a way that felt almost pleasant. The clean, earned exhaustion of physical effort, rather than the gritty hollowness of 2 nights without sleep. He calculated he was 3 hours from the town. He could make it before dark. He decided to stop, just for the night. Set a perimeter of empty water bottles around the tent. An old trick, something to trip and rattle if anything came close. And get 4 hours of real sleep before the final stretch. His watch alarm woke him at first light. He lay still for a moment, registering the absence of the dragging sound, the absence of the smell, the entirely ordinary quality of the forest sounds outside. Birds, wind, normal things doing normal things at a reasonable hour. He unzipped the tent and stepped out into pale morning light. He looked down. The prints were everywhere, circling the tent in an unbroken ring, inches from the fabric. The elongated, misshapen, wrong-proportioned prints pressed deep into the soft earth, as though whatever had made them had stood there for a long time, watching, waiting. He ran, not the focused efficiency of the morning before, running. The 3-hour walk became 2 hours, and then 90 minutes, and then he was breaking through the tree line onto a gravel road, with his lungs burning and his pack bouncing, and the sun already fully up. And ahead of him were houses, barns, a water tower, a sign for a town whose name he didn't stop to read. He slowed to a walk. Then he stopped walking entirely. There was a bar with its lights on, a phone line, a man in a yellow jacket loading something into a truck, who turned and looked at William with the expression of a person who has occasionally seen hikers emerge from that particular tree line and has learned not to ask. William called for a lift. He sat on a wooden step outside the bar with a cup of coffee someone had handed him without being asked, and he waited. And he looked back at the tree line. The forest was very dark at its center, even in full daylight. Trees that went on and on until they became shadow. Quiet in the way that large things are quiet. Not empty, just waiting. He thought about the lake, the impossible blue of it, the heron. The mountains reflected so perfectly you couldn't tell where stone ended and water began. The lift arrived.